Okay, here we go with Chapter 4, Defining the Project. So before we get into actually the process of defining the project, let's talk about a couple of items with regards to the project components that the project manager and project team will have to control during the project. So there are three components of all projects. Um, each project will have a cost, time, and scope component that must be managed by the project manager project team. So the project manager and project team need to manage the trade-offs of these three components as the project goes on, and there's can be different reasons. The changing of the scope, um, risks that occur that must be dealt with during the project. So the project manager is typically managing these priorities throughout the project. So there are three project criteria that are used to understand what the priorities are for each of these components: cost, time, and scope. So the first one is constrain. If a particular component is constrained, that means um, it is fixed. It cannot be changed due to some criteria that the customer has given to the project manager. So for example, if the specific time is fixed, um, and the schedule were to fall behind a bit, then the project manager may be forced to trade off some of the cost and work the project team overtime and pay extra money for that to keep the project on schedule. The other one is enhance. This would mean that you enhance one of the project criteria. Um, so during the project manager may find a method to save some cost or reduce the schedule, saving the customer some money or delivering the project ahead of schedule. This would be an example of an enhancement to one of those or several of those components. And then the other is accept. Which component is acceptable not to meet the original parameter. For example, it is permissible to is it permissible to reduce the scope of the project to meet the other components of the project, such as cost or schedule. Now, before we start really defining the project, we really have to understand some of the requirements for this project. So the first thing we'll do is consult the statement of work, or SOW. This gives kind of the high-level objective of the project by the sponsor. And then also we need to look at the business case. Every organization must make a business case to spend the resources on projects. So this will include analysis of the financial or non-financial reasons to committing to the project. And then we develop the project charter. This document is the real beginning of the project. This names the project manager, authorizes the project manager to start applying resources to the project, and gives a high-level project scope. Another term that we have here is called scope creep. And this is, as it says, the tendency for the project scope to expand over time due to changing requirements, specifications, and priorities. Now, scope creep, or the changing of the scope, is something that occurs on every project, but there is a method within a project called change control board or change control system that when there's changes that are asked for, changes to the scope that are asked for, then it can go through that change board and see how it affects other aspects of the project. So that's how we manage the scope creep in a project. We'll go through that a little bit further as we get into this course. This is the flow chart of the integration management knowledge area of the PMP processes. Now you can see that in the initiation process group, noted by the IN above that block that says develop project charter, you can see that we developed the project charter in that phase. And the inputs are the project statement of work and business case. And then when we get into the planning piece, we develop the project management plan, which utilizes the project charter and some other inputs to develop that process. And that project management plan basically encompasses a lot of the other plans, ancillary plans that come out of some of the other knowledge areas. Now we actually get into defining the scope of the project, and this is basically the end result of the project. This is what the major deliverable of this project will be in the end, and it must be specific to the customer's or the sponsor's requirement. The scope statement purposes of the scope statement is to give direction for planning the project. The scope statement is just the beginning of the long, tedious job of planning this project. This is where the deliverables, the technical requirements, exclusions, etc. are developed. We'll go through that a little bit later in some later slides. The scope management knowledge area or process, as defined by the PMP, is where majority of the planning of this project begins. Includes collecting all the customer requirements, defining the scope of the project, and creating the work breakdown structure for this project. Now, collecting the customer requirements is something that the project team does by meeting with the customer to get a full understanding of the project requirements. Now you can see here with defining the scope of the project, you're utilizing the project charter as an input, the requirements documentation that the project team got from meeting with the customer. That's what those are the inputs to defining the scope of the project and generates the project scope statement. From there, we move on to creating the work breakdown structure, or WBS. Well, now we'll talk about that a little bit further later in a presentation, but this is where the deliverables are developed and broken down into sub-deliverables using a technique called decomposition. Now, the scope is developed under the direction of the project manager, the customer/sponsor, and other key stakeholders of the project. This is very important to the success of the project, and it's very important to include these people in this discussion. There are 6 main components of the scope that must be focused on and communicated to the stakeholders. They are the project objective, the deliverables, the project milestones, the technical requirements, the limits and exclusions, and reviews with the customer. Now, the project objective, this is the first step in defining the scope and defines the overall objective to meet the customer's or sponsor's requirements or needs. It should be specific and measurable. The deliverables are further definition of the scope. This is where you start to break down the overall objective into measurable outputs throughout the project lifecycle. Through a process called decomposition, the project deliverables will be broken down into smaller and smaller components until they are broken down all the way to the work package component. Now, milestones are significant events that occur throughout the life of the project and show a major segment of work. Typically, milestones are used as a high-level way to measure progress of the project. Technical requirements are typically requirements that clarify the deliverables and or the performance specifications for the product, service, or result. Limits and exclusions. You must communicate the limits of the scope to the customer. In the limits and exclusions area, you would list the items that are not included in the work scope. This is important to ensure that the proper customer expectations are set. This can also help and limit scope creep as well. Reviews with the customer. The idea here is to communicate and get agreement from the customer or sponsor on the scope of the project. This is a very, very important step that will help in getting acceptance at the conclusion of the project. This concludes our discussion of defining the project scope. The next discussion will be developing the work breakdown structure. We'll do that in a separate PowerPoint, separate presentation.